Good morning. Hello there. How's everyone today? We have a bunch of seats in the middle over here and on this side, so please, we don't need anybody standing. All right. Well, thank you all for being here today, and I want to thank the 150 or so people that we have tuning in on the live stream. It's so great to be part of another Center for an Urban Future and Fisher Brothers event. I do want to give a big shout out to our friend and partner Winston Fisher and the team at Fisher Brothers for supporting this event and making today possible, but also for being such important and great partners for our Middle Class Jobs Project, which we've been doing with Fisher Brothers for a number of years now. So I think most of you probably know the Center for an Urban Future. I've seen a lot of you at multiple CUF events over the years, and I appreciate you coming again. But just quickly, for those that don't know, CUF is a think tank that uses research to elevate important issues onto the radar of government officials and spark policy changes and investments that create a stronger and more equitable economy in New York. Much of our work at the center focuses on how to expand access to good jobs and enable a lot more New Yorkers to climb into the middle class. And we know on those areas, a lot more work is needed. But making progress toward a more inclusive economy will be significantly more difficult if we don't also continue to grow the city's economy and expand the number of good jobs. And while there's so much that's going right today with New York's economy, for example, last week the city set an all-time high for jobs. That is worth getting excited about, right? Yeah. There's a lot going right in this city right now. But New York is also facing a vastly different post-pandemic landscape, one in which new economic realities like hybrid work, e-commerce, and artificial intelligence have the potential to create new challenges for New York and new competitive threats. As one example, just last week, a national report found that employees hired in 2023 live 35 miles from the office compared to 10 miles from the office in 2019. Fortunately, this moment offers an opportunity to get ahead of these and other challenges and reshape New York City's economy for the post-pandemic world. But seizing the opportunity and keeping New York competitive will require some new thinking, new ideas, and new approaches to economic development. That's why today's discussion is all about generating big ideas. We have an amazing group of panelists to help us think through what is possible and what city and state officials can do to keep New York ahead of emerging challenges and to build an even stronger city economy. Before we start the panel, I want to thank all of our speakers, all of our panelists for being here today. I want to thank one panelist for coming all the way from Boston this morning. Thank you, Tim. Thanks also to City Planning Director Dan Gorodnick, who will be doing a fireside chat a little later today with our CUF board member, Margaret Anadu. And finally, another huge thank to Winston Fisher, Fisher Brothers, Winston Fisher and Fisher Brothers. Also want to thank Brad Katz, who's been a great partner at Fisher Brothers with us at the Center for an Urban Future. And now I just want to turn it over, get the panel started. Eli Dvorkin, our policy director, is going to moderate. And if the whole panel could just come on up here and let's get started. Thank you all.
All right, good morning.
Good morning.
I'm so excited to moderate today's conversation. It's a really pleasure to be here with all of you. I'll just briefly mention to our audience here and on the live stream who we have up on the stage with me, and then we'll get right into it. So I'll start to my immediate right, John Wang, who is the founder of Queens Night Market. And for those who've eaten at Queens Night Market, you could hold your applause. We'll go through the whole rest of the panelists first. Claire Weiss, principal at WXY architecture firm. To her right, Ben Sun, the co-founder and general partner at Primary VC. Tim Rowe, founder and CEO of Cambridge Innovation Center. Jessica Lappin, who is the president of the Alliance for Downtown New York. And Greg Bishop, the executive director of the Joe and Clara Tsai Foundation Social Justice Fund. Welcome to all of you. Thanks for being with me today.
Thanks for having us.
There we go. That was the applause line.
That's all right. It was a little loose.
And we'll just do a couple of adjustments for the tallest and maybe the shortest among us. Thank you to the amazing team here at the Green Space. So, as Jonathan mentioned, there's some good news in New York City these days. An all-time number of private sector jobs. That seems like an accomplishment that would have been hard to imagine, 2 or 3 years ago. And I think more than that, even just the feeling in the streets. I mean, if you spend time in the city's busiest, neighborhoods, you can feel the energy of New York. There are folks eating late at night. There's nightlife in full swing. We see the power of our arts and culture sector, the New Yorkers that are using our parks and open spaces like never before. But there's also some real challenges out there, some headwinds brewing. I think partly we see that even when you look at some of the small businesses that are the backbone of the city's economy, revenues haven't returned to where they were in 2019. For a lot of folks, there's still a real disconnect between the jobs that people are able to access and the good jobs that are out there. And also the growth of some of the lowest wage parts of our economy. The fastest growing occupation in New York City continues to be home health care, in part driven by the fact that the part of our population that's grown by far the most are older adults. So we're seeing some of these bigger changes. And I think we also see it in our retail landscape. Not only the fact that we still see so many storefront vacancies in New York City, but also the reality, I think, that so many storefront businesses face with the challenges posed by e-commerce. The challenges of the pandemic might be receding, but there are bigger challenges that are in some ways only growing. So I want to ask all of you, before we get into a conversation that will absolutely be ideas focused, but to help us understand a little bit better, what do you all see as the most pressing of these long-term challenges? The challenges that might have been backburnered a little bit as the city worked to recover from the pandemic, but now need to be front and center. And I open this up to all of you. What are you most concerned about going forward for the city's long-term economic vitality?
Is there an order in which?
I'd say whoever wants to jump in can grab that one. It's a jump ball.
Well, I think we had mentioned this. Good morning, everyone, first of all. And it's a pleasure to be here. I think the thing that keeps me up at night is actually the affordability of the city. When you have a situation where sort of the individuals who would be the fabric of our city cannot afford to live here, that's a problem. And when we have a city where the income inequality is so stark, it becomes a challenge. And so that keeps me up at night. And we'll talk a little bit more, I think, about that. But I think, when a one-bedroom or a studio apartment is like $4,000, we have a problem.
Other thoughts?
Everyone's looking at you, Jessica.
And I swear it does not have to go in order from left to right.
I agree with Greg. Clearly, that is one of our, if not our biggest challenge, one of our biggest challenges. I think from the sort of business community perspective, the sense of quality of life, and that means so many different things, but that New Yorkers feel like that has really slipped, that there is a kind of a sense of lawlessness, that people can do whatever they want, whether it's on the sidewalks, on the subways, there are no repercussions, there's a lack of sort of respect for one another, real issues with safety, perceptions of safety, all ties into itself. There's a lot that gets wrapped up in sort of quality of life, but I do think that is a big challenge, and one you hear the mayor talking about, you hear the governor talking about, but clearly we need to be taking more steps.
Good morning. I'm Tim Rowe from Cambridge Innovation Center. We run buildings full of startups in a number of places around the world, and Jonathan asked me to share some of the thoughts I shared at a meeting we were at on kind of what's happening elsewhere. I want to start by just, you said what are the biggest challenges, and it's a little bit of a downer to kind of start on that. So I just want to recognize New York is in an incredible position globally, right? Is there any city in the world that had a claim to say that it's the capital of the world, that would be New York. A city that has better connectivity with nonstop flights, with everywhere. If you asked anyone in the entire world where they kind of most might aspire one day to be able to live, probably New York would come near the top of the list. So let's just recognize that there's a lot of advantages here. Let's start with that. There was a significant real estate executive a year and a half ago who commented that no big company would now choose to base itself in Manhattan. if it wasn't already here. And it was because of the cost of living here. So I completely agree with what you both said. And that's clearly got to be the first thing that we look at. And affordable, equitable housing is not an easy problem to solve, but it should be at the top of the list. I just want to share a reflection. I was recently in Indonesia. Some of you probably may have vacationed there or know the country. What you may not realize is that area of the world, ASEAN, including Malaysia and Vietnam and the Philippines, that area has a population now of about 700 million people. As compared with the United States, what are we at, 250 or something like that? It's growing very, very quickly. You can buy a home for some tens of thousands of dollars. A wonderful meal might cost you $2 or $3. I rented a motorcycle for the day for $2. We're in a world where the cost of living in fast-growing, economically increasingly successful places is a tiny, tiny fraction of what it is here in the United States. And it is a competitive world in the sense that businesses can say, gee, do I want to be based here or there? 10, 20, 50 years ago, we wouldn't have really considered that. Today, there are lots of places where businesses can base themselves and grow, and they are doing it. Look at a company like Google, which has huge location here, also has huge locations in those places and can choose where it recruits people. So it's a global competitive environment. We need to figure out how to be a place that can attract these global businesses. I'd start with housing, and later we can talk about some of the other things that I think needles that can be moved here.
Ben, let me bring you in on that point, because part of what we've been thinking about in terms of the longer term challenges is around what has actually been New York City's greatest strength. Its magnetism for people from all over the world, for talent, for founders, for innovators. And that's been the key to New York City's economic competitiveness in so many ways. But what you're describing, Tim, there's so many workers that have now become location independent, and in particular in tech, where you might actually find somebody who's getting paid a U.S. salary and is living, in a place like Indonesia, where that dollar is going to go so much further. So Ben, I guess I want to ask you a little bit about, so much of your investment thesis has really been about the unique strengths of New York, right? And I want to ask you, are you still as bullish as ever on this place? And if you can see this pattern playing out in our workforce here, with more folks feeling like they don't need to be in New York City, or at least in New York City 5 days a week, or in New York City, year round, does that change the dynamics in terms of our ability to continue to attract and retain talent? And what should we start to do about that?
Sure, it's a great question. So just quick background on me. I was born and raised in New York City. I was born and raised in Queens. I actually became a founder of a startup back in the mid to late 90s. I started a company on my one-bedroom apartment in Midtown. I bootstrapped it for 2 years, eventually raised $20 million of venture money during the peak of the dot-com boom, survived the dot-com crash, became profitable, ran a company just a couple blocks away where I had about 150 employees. I served as CEO for 12 years until we sold the company back in early 2008. I then eventually came back after I took a little bit of time off and started investing and incubating some companies with my own capital. And I remember telling somebody that I wanted to build, start a venture fund focused on New York City. And this is back in 2000, let's say, call it 13 or 14. And there was a Bay Area VC, very well known, top 10 Midas list, as Forbes calls it. And I remember telling him that I was thinking about starting a venture firm focused on New York, and his response was, "That's fucking insane." And so just to rewind the clock a little bit so you guys give you some perspective, the biggest exit in New York City tech history up to that time, this 2014-15, was Tumblr being acquired by Yahoo for $1 billion. So that was New York's only $1 billion tech exit outcome in its history, right? So he was like, why would you want to focus on a market that has not produced very meaningful startups? And I told him I thought it was about to all change. And the reason why was, I tell folks all the time, New York was always this great magnet for talent, as Tim brought up. It's always been this incredible center for talent. For most of the time, they just weren't working on tech startups. When I left investment banking as my first job, my friends were like, what? You're going to leave Merrill Lynch to do a tech startup? The dream is to work at Goldman, right? And that was basically the mindset that so much of the best and brightest were at investment banks, hedge funds, PE firms, consulting firms. And that's basically where the brain drain was until the financial crisis. When the financial crisis hit, you saw 200,000 Wall Street jobs were lost. Bain McKinsey fired people they weren't hiring. And so you saw a wave of entrepreneurs hit New York City. So what's now happened in New York City since the financial crisis? Since 2019, we've had over 50 New York City tech IPOs. And now we're talking about companies in the tens of billions of dollars in market cap. MongoDB, Datadog, to just name a few, right? You can like Peloton, Warby Parker, Squarespace. I mean, the list goes on and on. If you look at the number of private unicorns, New York went, in the last decade, we had 3 companies valued privately at $1 billion. Now it's almost 150. It's more than the next 10 markets combined. People say, what about Miami? Miami has 6 unicorns. New York has almost 150. If you look at the number of startups that are starting, last year New York had 940 companies raise seed rounds. That's your initial VC round. The Bay Area had 1,200. So we're 80% of the seed deals. These are companies that are getting funded in the early stages as the entire Bay Area. So amazing momentum what's happening. Your question on that is like, hey, does remote work change that? We have almost 100 active portfolio companies here in New York. They definitely have some people that are remote, but most of the core team is in the office. And they're actually returning office since the pandemic. Why is that? It's startups. It's that energy that comes together where you can just move much more quickly, communicate much more easily, and the culture, the drive, the passion of running a startup is all-encompassing, and people are being brought in. And founders are drawn to start their companies, as Tim said, because it's always been the center and magnet for talent. You ask, a recruiter at Goldman Sachs, who's your biggest competitor for young talent? Startups. So I would tell you that I think the tech economy in New York is probably one of the biggest kind of shining stars of our economy. I think the pressing question for us on the haves and have-nots is that if you walk through the hallways of these companies, right, it's actually not reflective of the diversity of New York. Yeah. And the reason why, it's a really fragmented market. Small companies, lots of them, they don't have big HR recruiting departments. They don't have big training or apprenticeship programs. So what happens is that people recruit from their social and professional development circles. So if you have people that are primarily not underrepresented minorities in these companies, they're going to hire other people that are like them. And so there's a whole class of people that are being left out of probably the biggest driver of our national or global economy. And that's probably the big gap that needs to be solved.
Thanks, Ben. Let me ask you, Claire, I want to bring you in on this conversation too, but in a slightly different way. I mean, I do want to return to Ben, your crucial points there. And it's something that we think about all the time at the Center for an Urban Future. But because we are focused today a little bit on specific ideas to strengthen the city's economy overall, Claire, I want to ask you this. So to Ben's point about absolutely the magnetism of New York has been our great strength. It strikes me that in past decades, it's been despite all of the hassles of being a New Yorker, there's been, we've been, this magnet, even with the trash, even with, the noise, the congestion, the lack of affordability. So I want to ask you about this, Claire, because it seems like, for decades, New York's benefited from the perception that it's just worth it to be here, no matter what. And other places might be easier. We're not about easy, if you can make it here, right? But I think you've argued that for the city to remain vibrant and competitive for the long term, that's got to change. That there needs to be a more concerted effort to address some of these issues that have just been written off as kind of this, the cost of being a New Yorker. So I want to ask you a little bit about that, Claire, and how you see those challenges now going forward, what it is that you think the city should be doing more of or doing differently, or what needs more support.
Well, I'm really glad I got to come after Ben, because when you think about what kept many of those people here, you could jog and bike down the Hudson River Park. You could stroll down the High Line. You could go to Brooklyn Bridge Park. You could go to Prospect Park. There might even be a bike lane or two, so you could commute to work. Now, all of that was the hard work over the last 10, 15 years of what I would call the public space movement. The Meatpacking District, Times Square, it goes on and on. Yeah. So the problem is that's hard work. It's really hard work. That's the work where many of those organizations, those bids, people in city government are working really hard. Astor Place, Astor Place is transformed, but it's still gritty. So in New York, there are ways to create more space for people. And yet, it's still regular sidewalks, and we got the curbs. And in a way, I see outdoor dining the same way, that it did change New York. The problem is that that depends on, I think, and I'm hugely admiring of the word public. I think we have one of the greatest public sectors, another asset, super creative people that work on behalf of the public of New York, a lot of good ideas. You know, shout out to someone like Ting, who's the public space officer, who, you know, did outdoor dining rules so that we can move forward. But there's a huge, on the negatives, we let the pandemic roll us back to where everyone thought it was okay to drive a car to work. I think unless, speaking of those who actually can't afford a car, have never learned to drive a car, are coming here without a car, and who need a dollar van, they need even cheaper ways to ride the subway, and they need support for buses. That's really where I see the big gap is, which is unless we focus on public transit and taking room out of our streets and might even putting in room for other modes of transit, we are going to be left in the wake. And then New York will be that city, and we've seen eras, maybe part of the 90s, maybe part of the 70s, where the hard work to get back to investing in the city, you really had to convince people. It was like, yeah, what do you mean this Queensway thing? No way. Or the High Line, I'm going to get a really big group of property owners and tell everyone that's the worst idea in the world. You know, like that actually happened. They sued. So really, I think that part of the problem is I feel that we're seeing a big backlash against investment in the city and against sort of believing that public is good.
Jessica, let me ask you about where you see this fitting in downtown. So, I mean, you know, I just want to mention, I think when you hang out downtown, you kind of see it all. You see the city's greatest strengths, but you also see some of its biggest challenges and the ways in which we still haven't healed from the pandemic, but also the long-term challenges, some of the vacancy rates, you know, some of those Class B and C buildings, but also where you see kind of the spark, you know, artists on Fulton Street again, and, you know, opportunities to use public space in more innovative ways. So tell me about what's working.
Absolutely. I mean, I think those of us in Lower Manhattan, you know, certainly our board, our stakeholders, owners, we've had lots of ups and downs over many decades. You know, 9/11, 2008, obviously COVID, the list goes on and on. So it's a group of people who I think more than maybe most are very resilient and definitely take the long view and are ultimately pretty optimistic because each time we have come back sort of better and stronger, even if it hasn't been linear, even if it's taken decades. I would say the streets right now, I was actually just walking with people last weekend, you know, it feels great. You know, if somebody says doom loop to me one more time, they haven't been to Lower Manhattan. I mean, being perfectly honest. You know, we use Placer for our data, not Castle, in terms of looking at occupancy, over 70% midweek. You know, let's take Fridays out of the equation. We can talk about Fridays separately, but the subways are full. There are people on the streets. The hotels downtown are back to almost pre-pandemic levels, and that's as we've just opened more and more and more and more of them. We have over 40 now in Lower Manhattan alone. Their room rates and their occupancy rates are quite good. The restaurants are doing well. The Perlman Performing Arts Center opened. So, you know, there is a real energy and vibrancy. Commercial leasing is not where we would like it to be, not just in Lower Manhattan, but all the central business districts, right? Over 20% vacancy rates, depending on where you are. There are going to be more pain points there, unfortunately. You know, you have lagging demand, you have high interest rates, you have people who need to refinance. There are lots of factors. So, you know, I think there are going to be some harder bumps along the way before we, you know, come out of this. We could talk about ideas for repurposing space and trends that we're seeing. You know, everybody talks about residential conversions. I think it's a very important part of the conversation. We've been doing it downtown since the 90s. We've already converted over 20 million square feet of space, right? So at least in Lower Manhattan, the low-hanging fruit is long gone, long gone. There's still conversions happening, the biggest in the country, frankly, at what was 4 New York Plaza, will be 1,200 units. That's happening right now. So there are conversions happening and will continue to happen. And we can come back to that because I'm sure others have ideas, but thinking about, in terms of big ideas, what are the other ways we can be using space for arts, for culture, for physical entertainment, exercise. I think there are real opportunities there, and we're starting to see very interesting uses along those lines. So I'll leave that there. I just, since Claire spoke before me, I did want to say something about public space, because again, I see BJ is here, and he's continuing out the work of the New York panel, which I was honored to serve on. But we worked with Claire at the Downtown Alliance a number of years ago on a plan around the New York Stock Exchange, which is in the New York panel report. And I would like for there to be more partnership from government on some of these public space reimaginings. I know they're expensive and I know they're complicated. And at a business improvement district, right, we're at the heart of public and private. We believe in that work together. And when we create new plazas and spaces, we're maintaining Coenty Slip, Whitehall, Stone Street, all the parks downtown. The list goes on and on. But to ask private owners to pay to repave streets, that just doesn't seem to be right? Even if we can come up with a vision and a plan and work together and then agree to do the maintenance at the other end, I think we have to really think about, what does the city do? What does government do? I think road beds, to me, sounds like the city. And then what do the private partners do? And those conversations are happening not just in Lower Manhattan, but across the city, because there are so many opportunities for us to reinvigorate the city by reclaiming some of this space, but it's expensive, and the economic realities for private owners are very different than they were 5 years ago. So we're willing to do our part, but we need government to work with us.
Thanks, Jessica. Well, let's stay on this topic for a minute. I mean, I'd love to hear everybody's thoughts, ideas, big or small, around public space and the public realm. And I think in particular around this idea around strengthening the city's post-pandemic economy, which to me says, yes, absolutely, more of this is needed in our central business districts, where we still haven't, where commercial, leasing is low, and we still haven't seen the full return of foot traffic, especially on Fridays maybe. But also I'm thinking about other parts of the city where New Yorkers who are living and working more at home than ever before are sort of shifting their radius. They're spending more time within a couple of miles of wherever home is, and not necessarily coming into Manhattan every single day. But I don't think we've had the same level of kind of uptake for reimagining the public realm across all 5 boroughs that we've started to see in places where there's a healthy bid, for instance, or where there's more private support. So tell me some of your ideas, big or small, around. And Claire, I know you're going to jump in on this one.
I just want to support
around
what
space.
Jessica said, which is every time New York City, and New York City's good at making high quality public space investments when they do it, that's actually what helps the private sector. So we really digging deep and making those investments, the public investment in Lower Manhattan, in Governor's Island, in all of our boroughs, especially in parts of Queens, the Queensway, the IBX, the Bronx, I could go on and on, is absolutely worth it. Our subways, that's actually the investment that no private landowner can make by themselves. And so I really think the most innovative thing we can do in New York is actually find a way to do way more of that as quickly as possible and at the highest quality levels. Because actually in other cities, when they wait for the private sector, or it's a private park, or it's a private mall that everyone uses, guess what? New York is an attractive city because we actually believe the public can do that. So I just totally echoing Jessica there, that this is something New York has to do as New York. So, I could pitch. I'm going to wait for you to pitch more ideas, but, later on, I will tell you my latest.
No, that's
public
great,
space
Claire. We'd love to get more of those ideas. And John, let me ask you about this too, because I think what Claire was saying around the public sector's role in public space obviously makes sense. But I'm also really struck by how much ends up having to happen in New York City because there's just some entrepreneurial person who takes the lead. And I think the Queens Night Market is a perfect example of that. It strikes me as exactly the kind of immersive cultural experience that we need more of as the city thinks about what the post-pandemic economy should look like and could look like. But I also know that it wasn't as though the city kind of came in and said, hey, we see all the potential here. We've got this parking lot. Why don't we do something incredibly exciting, economically productive, inclusive, like the Queens Night Market? That was you. So I want to ask a little bit about, not just that process, but if the city of New York wants to get behind more of what makes the Queens Night Market such a success, how do we get there?
Sure. I have you can see how many panels I've been on because I have my notes. No one else here has. I actually have the first thing in my notes, and I'm assuming we're in the cone of confidence. My first bullet point is don't work with the city. So there's some people think we do the Queens Night Market, if you haven't been. It's sort of an outdoor open air festival centered around two pillars, one being diversity and the other being affordability. Despite the fact that we exist in a park, Flushing Meadows, Corona Park, we actually don't contract with the city. And if you went back to 2014, exactly 10 years ago, right about this time, when I was pitching the idea to parks, I was like, look, there's this, I grew up attending night markets in Taiwan. I would love to bring that here. Here are some elements of what would make it, especially New York, super Queens. They were like, oh, that's really a great idea. Talk to us in 6 months, and talk to us again in 6 months. And anyways, it just ended up not happening, and they put all these restrictions on it about, from day one, I was like, I would like to open from 6 to midnight. I would like 100 vendors. Here are some of the, parameters. And they're like, oh, yeah, come back to us and come keep refining your idea. And, we're almost at sort of the time where we needed to make a go, no-go sort of decision. And they, finally I got a meeting with Parks, like the sort of top brass. And they're like, okay, well, we've reviewed your proposal for 6 months. Here's what we'll give you. We'll let you operate till 8 p.m. and we'll let you have like 20 vendors. I was like, well, you've been sitting on this for 8 months. Like, what is the problem here? So eventually we ended up going, probably more in the weeds than you need to know, but we contract specifically privately with the museum who hosts us. But if you sort of go back to 2014, all our initial renderings are around the Unisphere, which I still think, would be amazing and sort of really, really iconic. I tried to renew a bid again, cone of confidence. Like I tried to renew a bid.
You
to
are
go
in like
there.
a news studio when it's being. I just want to say, just a little advice.
We do consider this entire
Broadcasted
conversation
live on the internet.
totally off the record. No one's out here. There aren't 180 people online.
But keep that. It's fascinating.
Pretty big cone. Okay.
Between you and your
Right.
350 best
Exactly.
friends.
So we made a bid to go back to the Unisphere, sort of relaunch this proposal. And even in that proposal, right, I was trying to think of big ideas. I don't have that many. But in that proposal to take it back to the Unisphere, take it to the Unisphere for the first time, which didn't get approved, but I actually put in there, I would be willing to sell it to parks, right? For virtually no money. Like, I will show you how to run it. I think it's a public amenity. It should be a public amenity. I have to run it as a for-profit because of all sorts of restrictions and the complications of getting it up and running, but there was no reception to that. I was like, look, that's weird. Like, you have the built-in staffing for it. If it's a public place that, as far as I know, no one sort of really objected to the Queens Night Market in its last 10 years of existence, except when we have, like, car traffic, right? That becomes an issue on its own. Touches on commutability and that kind of stuff. But I've been actually, to be frank, in our ginormous cone of confidence, like looking for an exit for like years and years because it's been like so many white hairs and don't sleep. But many fewer zeros than you were talking. Not a unicorn, like pony or something. I don't know what you would call it. But I was like, I will give it to parks. Like I have no there's no trade secrets in building it. There was no sort of secret formula. I had no trade experience, no industry experience. I was just like, here's how I want to create it. I want to create New York City's most diverse and most affordable community space, period. And everything else, sort of every decision chased after that sort of premise. So yeah, I think going to back what keeps you up at night, affordability keeps me up at night, and I know that a lot of it talks about housing and how do people afford housing, but like I'm always worried about how much that burger costs and how much that cocktail costs. Like it's amazing. I don't know. I'm not an economist, so I can't track things, but I'm always wondering, well, if the minimum wage is $15 and the cheapest cocktail you can buy is $22 or something, that's crazy. Like I don't know how you sort of make that balance sheet work. So, in case you don't know, for anyone who hasn't been to the Queens Night Market, the premise in 2015 was no food you could buy at the Queens Night Market could be more than $5. In 2017, we introduced some limited $6 exceptions, and to this day, 9 years later, it's still $5, $6, nothing you can buy. And we're sort of growing into our relevance in some way. I used to think that was a cool concept. When I was like, you could walk around with a $5 bill. Not that people carry cash anymore, but you walk around with a $5 bill and get anything you wanted at the Queens Night Market. And now that cocktails are $22, the idea that you can still get food for $5, $6 is sort of, I feel like, made us even more relevant and sort of more special and more of a public amenity, more than ever. So. So my big idea was, I'm still willing to sell it to the Parks Department.
Well, there's a certain think tank I know that published a report a few weeks ago, 20 innovative ideas for generating recurring revenues for parks. So maybe there's a fit there. But, so, Greg, let me ask you. I mean, now your nightmares have been brought up a couple times. So things that keep you up at night. And I want to ask you about something that we just talked about the other day, which is, arguably it's never been harder in New York City's history to be middle class than it is today. There are the vast majority of programs of all shapes and sizes that the state and the city provide. You're ineligible for those programs if you make even just a little bit too much money. But at the same time, I think most middle-class families and workers in New York City are just living in that precarity of being paycheck to paycheck and don't see a way out of that. So tell me a little bit about how concerned should we be about the future of the middle class here, and what are one or two ideas that you might have about that?
And first of all, John, I love the cone of silence here and confidence. But I love the fact that it was an idea that you took from another country, right, and brought it here. And I'm going to get to your question in a second, but that was like one of my ideas was addressing the vacant storefronts and the fact that you're not going to get out of the 200,000 businesses in New York City, most of them are micro businesses, right? Most of them are individuals who are not working for a startup. And I worked for a couple of startups back in the night. When you were talking, I was like, oh yeah, I remember that era. Anything.com, $20 million, $30 million, whatever. But for those that don't have, the skill set to work in tech, et cetera, they're going to gravitate to entrepreneurship, right? It's just a natural thing. We see it at NYC, we see it everywhere. But a lot of individuals don't have the capital to actually open up a business in a storefront, to get the attorneys, to get HR, et cetera, et cetera. And in the Caribbean, where I'm from, there's this thing called marketplaces, right? It's literally different stands and stalls, and they're micro enterprises that's operating in one building. Shout out to Una Clark, who was, back in I guess it was in the early 90s, put city funding to create the Flatbush Caton Marketplace in Brooklyn. It's now affordable housing development, but they still kept, sort of like that theme of a marketplace. And so thinking about that sort of like idea, you have a number of empty storefronts all across the city in commercial corridors. And Jessica understands, the impact that an empty storefront will have. Is it possible? And I know it's a little bit challenged, but maybe it's not the agency, but maybe it's, an agency that has flexibility like an EDC, et cetera, that could open up and have a master lease in certain areas to pilot these marketplaces where micro businesses can actually participate in. We've seen it in Brooklyn, in Bed-Stuy, Thompson Avenue. There's like one building where there's like 4 micro businesses inside that one building. And so I think that is definitely worth something to explore, because we've seen Essex Market, we've seen DeKalb Market. The marketplace idea works, and it brings micro businesses, it gives them the experience that they need to then decide whether or not I want to go out on my own, right? But I do think, so that's the individuals who are gravitating to entrepreneurship. But we've always had this sort of like duality where in order to be successful in New York City, you either have to be really poor or really rich, right? The middle class is sort of like left out. And that is concerning to me, because when you look at some of the programs, even when we at SBS, and I will say it because I'm not there anymore, we had a great program with NYCHA. It was called the Food Business Pathways Program. These were for entrepreneurs. These are individuals who are running their business in their apartments, and they have an informal business, and we're trying to make them into a formal business. We're trying to, like, you have a catering company. Yes, your family wants you to make those pumpkin pies, but guess what? That's a business. Let's get you the tools necessary to, like, put some, some structure around that business, et cetera, et cetera. We had so many individuals participating, but then the follow-up in terms of executing and actually growing that business, we only had 1 or 2. And the reason being is the benefits cliff, right? Literally, I don't know if my business is going to earn enough money for me to sort of take the profits from that business to compensate for the loss of all the benefits that I'm going to lose based on the fact that I'm now earning more, right? Because I'm entered into the middle class, right? So I don't know if I'm going to be able to afford that. And so individuals don't actually want to be successful. And that's a problem. Like when you are in a place where all the programs are either for one set of income class, and or you just don't need those programs, that is a problem. And it is not politically, well, it's not politically correct for a politician to say like, no, we want this housing for not only low income, but for middle class and for market rate housing, right? You will see a lot of elected officials, they obviously cater to the lower income segment of the city, but we cannot have a city where it's either you have to be low income or you have to be wealthy. And the middle class is what drives an economy, right? The middle class is what, they're the ones that's going out to dinner. They're the ones that's, supporting the businesses that we need to be supported. And, you could look at different neighborhoods like Brownsville, for example, where in the 60s and 70s, there was a huge concentration of affordable housing for the poor. And now you have a situation where Brownsville is struggling to sort of like come out of the problems that they have because they have super blocks of poverty. And so when you look at, for example, there's certain neighborhoods in Brooklyn where you have like a nice mix, and you'll talk. Yeah, I've spoken to folks from the city planning where they talk about you need to have a mix. You need to have low income, you need to have middle class, and you need to have market rate in a community in order for that community to thrive. And that is like that's economic development 101. And so my concern in New York City is that there's no one talking about the middle class, right? Because it's just not politically correct. And that is a concern for me, because that is where, when you think about, the challenge of affordability, it's the middle class that's being pushed out, right? It's literally the heart and soul of what any municipality, any city, because you can see what happens. If you look at Johannesburg, extreme income inequality. If you look at Rio, extreme income inequality. And if we don't provide opportunities for the middle class to thrive, and it actually goes back right to housing, right? Because the middle class will have the opportunity to work, but it's can they actually live in the place that they want to live?
Thanks, Greg.
I'm not going to run for office, so that's why I can say all the stuff I can say.
So, I want to. There's a lot there, Greg. And I want to start with this point around entrepreneurship, because I think this has actually been one of New York's great strengths, and in particular in recent years, coming through the pandemic. We've seen more new businesses started in New York City than ever before, and that has been led by just really striking growth in Brooklyn and the Bronx. But as we know, half of all businesses won't make it 5 years, and those numbers are disproportionately bad for businesses started by people of color. At the same time, we've also got this incredible concentration of innovative companies, startups. We've seen more startups than ever before as well, from 9,000 or so a decade ago to 25,000 here in New York City now. So this is a pretty broad question, but I want to ask all of you, if the city wants to really lean into its strengths as a hub of entrepreneurship, to really strengthen its supports for entrepreneurs at every stage and in every area, so that we have more clusters of innovative companies starting here, but also more support for lower income entrepreneurs who've started businesses in record numbers just in the past 4 years, what should we be doing?
I mean, I'll touch upon some of it. So, people look at tech as disrupting small businesses. Often the case, tech has been an incredible enabler of small businesses. Mm-hmm. So I'll give you a classic story of a company I'm on the board of. It's a company called Slice. Great New York story. Alir Sella grew up in Staten Island. He's a Albanian immigrant. His father and uncle owned a pizza shop in New York City. Alir graduated from college with a comp sci degree, basically started his own business. He started building websites, and of course his first clients were his friends and family's pizza businesses. As Alir likes to say, if you go to any pizza joint and if they tell you they're Italian, they're most likely Albanian. And so he started basically building their websites for them, and then said, oh, let me help you with online ordering, because he saw what Domino's was doing. If you actually look at Domino's, I think back in 2010, the stock was at $3. I think now it's somewhere between $400 to $500. And it's not because Domino's pizza got 100 times better. I would definitely tell you
Domino's
it did not.
apologize for their pizza being bad.
That's how bad
Maybe
it is.
It did get a little bit.
That's how bad it is. It's really because of digital ordering. Mm-hmm. So what happened was, your average Domino's franchisee, their busiest time is during dinner. They're trying to answer the phone and make pizzas. and they're trying to get you off the phone as fast as possible. Suddenly they were taking digital orders, and what happened was the digital orders were a lot bigger in size. People looked on the menu and they saw the toppings, they saw the garlic knots, they saw they said, hey, would you buy a 2-liter of Coke? So the average order went from $18 to $30 for that same customer. And those people came back because it was so convenient. And so Domino's stock took off because Domino's provided technology to their franchisees. Independent pizza shops, which makes up the majority of the pizza market in terms of pizza restaurants, didn't have that technology. Alir started basically not only helping with their websites, but doing online ordering. He put them all on one site called the My Pizza. I met Alir. He had never raised venture capital. He built this technology. I said, hey, where's your business at? He's like, I got 4,000 pizza shops on the platform. I processed $40 million of pizza orders. He was making $4 million of revenues, and he was doing $3 million of profit as a sole owner of the business, living in Staten Island, driving a Bentley. He doesn't like me to tell him, to tell people that. He was like, I'm making so much money. My brother said I should buy a nice car. And he literally bought a Bentley. And so Alir now, now has raised venture capital. He's now processed over $1 billion of pizza orders a year.
What's the
You won't like me to say what he's driving now. He's done very well. But he's really empowering all these small businesses, right? He's taking these pizza shop owners and enabling to have successful businesses. So tech's been an amazing enabler for entrepreneurship in so many ways. Even if you take a business like Amazon, it's an incredible marketplace for third-party sellers. There are millions of third-party sellers running profitable small businesses on Amazon's platform. So I would tell you that when you look at technology, you have to look at the lens of like, it is both enabling small business, but also, yes, it is also concentrating power to a bunch of companies as well. But at the end of the day, we're seeing a better consumer experience. We're seeing better benefits overall across all these sectors, and it's a pretty powerful unlock that I think will continue to propel New York into kind of this next generation of like more wealth.
May I add on to that a little bit?
Please, yeah.
So I think the question was, sort of what can New York do to do more of this?
Yeah.
The tech sector is clearly doing incredibly well in New York, better than ever. One of the outside observations on New York is that when finance is doing really well, it tends to pull that talent away from tech, and when finance isn't hiring as much, it flows into tech startups. And so I think one of New York's longer term challenges will be to sustain this tech sector by really consolidating it, really becoming not just a place that has incredible talent that sometimes goes into tech, but a place where people from around the world who want to be in tech startups come to.
I think that's changed really dramatically. That was definitely the case prior to the financial crisis. I'd say over the last 5 or 6 years, New York is now like the whole success begets success. It's at a different level now. It is now the second most important tech market in the world.
It's doing incredibly well. So but I guess what the question I would have is, what are the things that New York can do to go, to the next level? Not saying it isn't where it needs to be, but what can it do to be even stronger? And an area that New York is interested in getting more into and has not yet been as strong is the so-called deep tech, the kind of the more heavy science kind of tech, right? Doing really well right now, in particular in the kind of the general business tech, and more in life sciences, more and more in some of these subsectors, but still behind other areas. There's an interesting phenomenon going on right now where you've got a lot of cities around the world that are leaning in, saying how do they take some of this action? How do they get ahead? And there may be some learnings from them. So let's take Korea, for instance. Seoul is going through a process right now of planning to build a 1 million square foot building on their Central Park, as central as New York Central Park, just for startups, with all of the heavy duty gear and equipment that you would need for deep tech. New York hasn't done that yet at that scale. New York, for instance, has my guess is 40,000 square feet of, for instance, shared wet lab for people interested in doing life sciences startups.
Yeah.
We have something like 500,000 square feet of that in the Kendall Square area next to MIT, where we're headquartered. And Seoul is saying, we want to eat your lunch. They're going to invest over $1 billion in this. So as you look around the world, there are a move for New York to think about is investing more heavily in these kind of shared infrastructure elements. I said earlier that the number one thing to think about is housing and affordability. I still think that's right. But as we go into sort of some of the more kind of moves that New York can make in trying to be stronger in particular verticals, it might be in establishing the kind of shared infrastructure for these more science-oriented, kind of deeper technology-oriented businesses. NYC EDC has recently announced 2 initiatives, both $100 million initiatives, one in life sciences and one in clean tech, that I think are promising in this area. This isn't something New York's not thinking about. It is thinking about them. I think that's the right direction. Although it's also useful to know that Seoul is planning to spend $1.2 billion on this. Tokyo is a $450 million project to build a similar kind of deep tech hub. If you look at Riyadh, it's insane what they're doing. It's many billions of dollars on their innovation hubs that they're building in the city, particularly at New Maraba, which is they're building a neighborhood the size of Kendall Square near MIT just for tech startups. It's like a whole new section of the city, like downtown Manhattan. They're saying this is all going to be for startups, and they have the oil money that they can spend to build it. So in this kind of environment, an interesting question is which verticals it makes sense for New York to, and I don't pretend to know, but New York makes sense for New York to lean in on as other places become, if you will, more equipped to attract talent from around the world in some of these sectors. So that's an interesting question, I guess, for New York to think about.
Yeah, I think the city investing in that infrastructure, I'm not sure it'll all be a good thing, but I don't think it's a gating factor at this point. I'm on the board of a company called Coupang. It's basically the Amazon of Korea. It's a $32 billion market cap business, publicly traded New York Stock Exchange. I met the founder here in New York, and he then moved to Korea to basically start the largest e-commerce company in Korea. And back then, there were just no startup entrepreneurs. There was barely any startup operators. So we often had to recruit in markets like the US and India to recruit people to work in Korea, because a lot of the best and brightest were working at big giant conglomerates like Samsung, LG, Hyundai, et cetera. And it was hard for them to even think about working at startups, as well as have any experience of working at startups, which is really just culturally different. And so I could see where that shift needs to happen, where the city or the country needs to basically build hubs and kind of spur that kind of energy. But New York at this point, there are billions and billions and billions of venture capital dollars pouring into the city each year for New York City startups. We're now talking thousands and thousands of companies. The train has left the station. There's so much momentum. We're investors in a number of deep tech companies here. There's just so much talent and energy, and because of the dollars flowing in the private sector and how much momentum there currently is, sure, it'd be a benefit, but I don't think it's not at all keeping me up at night. Not at all.
So then I turn around and say, so what would you focus on if you're now mayor of New York and you're saying, all right, I want to take New York to the next level as a startup and innovation hub? What would you do?
I think right now there's just the communities of people that are not exposed to what's happening in startups. We have to figure out how to bridge that.
Yep.
So that's the issue, is that most of the local New York residents, I opened up my comments about this, are just not exposed to tech. And so we're actually often trying to draw people from outside of New York to come here, right? So people talk about us like, oh, you see Bay Area people moving here, or people from Boston coming here, or DC, et cetera. That's what's happening. You look at any business school class now, they're all coming to New York, and a lot of them are working at startups. There's an amazing amount of people that work here that, yes, maybe you work in sales at a medical equipment company or at Pitney Bowes or whatever. There's no offense to Pitney Bowes, but you should be working in a tech startup, right? There's much more tailwinds, there's much more upside, there's much more career growth, and we need more of those folks inside in New York City that born and raised here, that grew up here, to be working in these companies, because those are going to be your future C-suite leaders, your future founders, your future VCs. People talk about the disparity on hey, why aren't there more dollars going to black founders? And I was like, as a VC, you need to back people ideally with experience. You've been at a tech startup. If you never worked at a deep tech company, it's hard to start a deep tech company. If you never worked at a fintech company, it's hard to start a fintech company. This is where innovation is happening, and you need more of the populations of these people to work at these companies who are your future founders or your future VCs. And that's one of the big gating factors that the community needs to provide, definitely a city, of just getting folks more of that exposure.
Thanks, Ben. So I know I started off asking about the entrepreneurial ecosystem. Claire, why don't you feel free to jump in? But I also just want to say for everybody, and really building on Tim's elegant turnaround there, I'd love to hear from everybody your other ideas. Doesn't have to be around entrepreneurship. Any other ideas that you see as essential for strengthening our post-pandemic
Well,
economy?
I think it's really connected to this issue of regular people,
Yeah.
right? And and you move here, where did your kid go to school? What do you do on the weekend? Like, all of those things are really what's going to drive what you're talking about. And public schools, how we want to spend money on getting people interested in deep tech or whatever, spend the same amount of money, which is why I think the Spark thing was interesting,
Yeah.
the same amount of money on schools, at least 10 of them, all over New York, in paying those teachers, in attracting people to teach in schools. Then make sure that you're spending a lot of money dealing with our transit deserts, so that every neighborhood of New York has a way to get to our lower Manhattans, our midtowns, even our Grand Concourse in the Bronx. Like, we're not doing that. And if we don't do that, then people are going to move back to where they migrated from. They're going to get frustrated. They're going to, go to a city where it's cheaper to send their kids to a private school. Those schools are never going to compete with the talent in New York, but we have to believe in them and invest in them. And on the housing idea, I really think we used to have a great idea called affordable co-ops. And I think we have to go back to figuring out how to invest in New York City in co-ops, and in the kind of co-ops where you can buy it pretty cheaply, and there's still some left in New York. And then, when you leave, you have to pay it back into the co-op, and you get the difference of 25%.
Mitchell-Lama, is that
What?
Mitchell-Lama?
Well, it was, but like they're still all over New York. Queensbridge House, or
The
Queens,
HDFC co-ops.
the HDFC co-ops. Some have gone, but really, even co-ops all over the place have a little bit of that, and we need to double down, because that's exactly the kind of shared living that I think people come to you. You want your own place, but you might have ideas about how to live with other people. And so if you think about younger people, I think we should care more about the ideas they want and be much more micro and get to work more quickly. And what I would say about the public-private thing is exactly right. The city should build it, and we should let other people, not-for-profits, entrepreneurs run it, I'd love to see transportation alternatives get a lane in every street and run, and instead of just being an advocacy group, actually run a new lane for alternative vehicles, and even grade the sidewalks and all of that. We could really use it, I think.
Thanks, Claire. Other ideas from the panel?
Actually, I'd like to build on that one. I think that's the first sort of really big idea that's come out so far in the panel, to take a lane in the roads and really rethink transportation. I'm sure this is something that you guys are thinking about. In a few places around the country, they're doing something similar at the highway level, where they're taking a lane and kind of re-engineering how it's used completely. Between Ann Arbor and Detroit, they've taken a lane and said, okay, this is going to be autonomous vehicles only. What's interesting about that, it's sort of like the HOV lane that we're all familiar with on highways, except that you can put, let's say, a free bus on that, so that you get, kind of a diverse access to the high-speed transportation, and they're planning to charge quite a bit to private cars to use it. When you make it autonomous only, you can roughly double the average speed that you get to a place. So, a place that's had an hour away is now only half an hour away, which gives access to housing for parts of New York that don't have lower cost housing. And you can also make it much more predictable about when you'll actually get into town. So I would second this notion of really experimenting. I don't have the city focused version of this that I've seen yet around the country. Maybe one of your startups can figure this out. But really cracking transportation actually helps crack housing in an interesting way.
Yeah, Eli, on our front, we just actually kind of publicly announced last week that my partner and I are helping fund and start a nonprofit called the Factor Fellowship. And what we're trying to do is create kind of that on-ramp for these underrepresented groups in New York City who want to break into venture-backed startups to basically get training, mentorship, a network. It's basically an after kind of hours program after work for a number of months where we can basically get them more acclimated to what's happening in tech, the language of tech, how you work in tech, the network to get opportunities, and then basically allow them to then get placed or interviewed at a number of these venture-backed tech startups. Again, the problem with the venture-backed tech startup community, they're all very fragmented businesses. They aren't like large corporations, and trying to figure out how to kind of bridge that gap where those companies can't take a risk on someone that doesn't really completely know what they're getting into or like doesn't have some experience there, of basically helping bridge that. And so my partner and I have committed personally $1 million to help initially fund it, but now we're getting the support of all these venture-backed startups, VCs, and we're talking to people in obviously the public sector as well to help support that. So this is, this is a idea that we've had in a while that we just saw as a problem that everyone was trying to address about like, how do you source great talent here in New York that's here and just create this on-ramp.
That's great, Ben. Open to any other ideas. I also want to throw out one potential area to discuss, which is another great strength of New York, our arts and culture sector.
I was just gonna say that.
I won't say anything else, Jessica. Let me know what you think.
Because you opened up by discussing, we live here sort of despite, right, all the things that make it hard, but we live here for the food, if you're me,
Yep.
and arts and culture. I mean, because you really can access that at any price point in the city, from the excellent free programming to the world's best museums and shows. So I think for sure you want to lean into that in a recovery moment, but in any moment. I know you have Dan Garodnick coming next, and he can talk about some of the zoning changes, but making it easy for new arts and cultural institutions, because that can mean a lot of things. I think of your night market as culture, right? That's arts and culture, right?
Sure.
So, and the city is very rigid about how it thinks about things, right? If you fit into a bucket or a box, then you do. If you're doing something that's never been done before, they don't know what to do with you. And that's a real problem. In public spaces and squares, but in private buildings as well. And so, I did mention, we have on Water Street now, this is actually a great example, what was the old AIG building, 175 Water. It's now been rebranded as WSA. They got an MCOR EDC grant of $40 million. They're committing to spend well over $100 million on the building. It's going to be a total mix of artisans, artists, makers. I was touring it recently. They're photographers. They're people actually manufacturing clothing. They're going to have a department store where people will share. They're going to have art exhibit. I mean, it's massive. It's very ambitious. It's super cool, right? Super cool to take this old sort of insurance building and transform it. But the Century 21 space that's on Day Street reopened as this new immersive art exhibition. There are cool things. I'm always, since the Fishers, what they've done in Las Vegas at Area 15, I've been more than once. I mean, I think about that. I mean, that's huge, but so awesome. So I think those are different big ideas. I'm not an artist, right? I'm not going to have that one artistic idea, but the zoning rules have to allow for these new uses in places that are totally appropriate but not allowed today. If we want to have, we have squash courts and tennis courts and other things that have opened since the pandemic, been very successful in Lower Manhattan, in underground space on the 33rd floor of a building. Why not? Right? Why not? So, and he'll speak more to that, but I think we really have to push the envelope on what we're allowing, because we want to be cutting edge.
Thanks, Jessica. So on that note, I want to push the envelope a little bit and also out to our audience too, in terms of other ideas. The way that we're going to structure this conversation, or this last piece, we have 2 staff members with microphones. Folks are going to come around, put your hands up if you have a question or an idea. I just ask, please keep it to under a minute so we can get to as many as possible. So let me just see a show of hands. So we'll start right here in the front. There's a few. We'll come back behind me and then to the back, and we'll take as many as we can. But please do let us know who you are, and please keep it brief. Thank you so much.
Okie dokie. Hey, I'm Christine. I work with Alliance Building Services. And one of my ideas in terms of just shaking up, if you will, the post-pandemic economy is really focusing a little bit more on diversity and what that means, because diversity and inclusion means so many things. And maybe doing a SWOT analysis in our own companies and existing companies that are performing well, and figuring out who their underrepresented communities are and what attracted them to those organizations, and trying to mimic that across the sector and the industry. I think that's super important. Another thing is just really focusing on connecting with our public high schools and our public middle schools around some of these special initiatives and where the jobs are going.
Thank you. And so I saw a hand in the back, and then we'll come here to the front, and we'll keep it going from there.
Hi, my name is Martin Vandersman. I'm a residential real estate broker here in New York. I was recently visiting my mother, who lives in northwestern Europe, and just a short train ride from there, I was in Paris for the first time in 15 years, and I experienced a city that I've known my whole life as very, very different. I hadn't been there in about 15 years. And I looked around and I thought, wow, can we send Eric Adams here for an internship?
Exactly.
It's a cycling city. I've never known it to be a cycling city. I mean, cars would kill you to cross the whatever street. And it was such a world difference. I've always enjoyed Paris, but I thought this is a good model.
Thank you. So I saw a hand right here. And also, folks do want to respond to anything, feel free to jump in, but we'll try to get more to questions and ideas.
Thank you very much, Bishop. Hello.
How you doing?
It's great to see you, by the way.
Good to
It's
see
been a
you.
while. So my question, pretty much close to what she was saying, particularly about you're talking about, investors, board members. My company is called Silicon Harlem, so I'm in Upper Manhattan all the time. Great, smart people doing great things. We don't find the board members. We don't find the investors coming uptown. There's 14 colleges in Harlem. Some of you went to school there. Anybody come from Columbia, City College, all these things? 14 of them. So my question is, how do we bridge that? When we talk about, downtown Brooklyn or even Silicon Valley, all these places, is exactly what you've talked about, which is it's great to have board members and great to have support, have investors. We don't see those people coming up, and I'm happy to have a space just like this that we can have these kind of talks all the time. So I would hope that can be addressed by some of you.
Any thoughts?
I think that they're too closely related, right? Your idea, I love when we were talking about diversity in tech and diversity in is exposure and access to networks, right? And I think we have to be intentional. And unfortunately, in the we were talking about New York City and big ideas, but the thing that really keeps me up at night is the political climate in this country and the fact that we don't want to talk about diversity and the fact that we can't even say equity anymore and the fact that we're like ripping out all these things because we are afraid to get sued, right? That is what's happening in this country. Just 2 days ago, the Minority Business Development Agency, there was a ruling that they cannot serve minority businesses anymore, right? Because that's unconstitutional because of the Supreme Court makeup. So that is really what keeps me up at night. And we won't get to the point where, a high school kid like me who went to Brooklyn Tech, who was exposed to technology and was able to get, the bandwidth in my neighborhood to actually get online because of infrastructure issues, like that was my exposure. And I think we really need to be, work with the industry here in New York City. And when we were thinking, when you were talking, I was like, well, we need these corporations to adopt high schools, right?
Yeah.
We need these corporations to be in our middle schools, to be in our high schools, and to provide the necessary resources that maybe the city cannot provide to get them that exposure. And then that is the pipeline that will get you that board member that you need, or that individual from that corporation will know about that company up in Harlem and then say, oh, wait a minute, there's actually a company that I need to invest in. So I'll stop here because I know we want to like get more, but there's so much more we could talk about that in terms of like what we as a city can do to sort of like buck the national trend of like, we're not going to talk about anything diversity, equity, or inclusion related.
Can I add an example? So D15, which is a middle school district in Brooklyn, they're starting, and we're working with DOE to create the Everyone's PTA. So on their PTA is Brooklyn Museum in downtown Brooklyn, and so it's a model for a new kind of looking at PTA in our middle schools in New York Public. So maybe that a kind of idea like that, which is a pilot with Brooklyn's Community Trust, could actually be piloted for other middle schools, because that's really, I think, where it all happens.
Absolutely. Great.
Thanks for the comment. So yes, right there.
Hi, everyone. I'm Celeste Fry. Good to see y'all with Public Works Partners. And I think so many great ideas. But one that I have not heard yet that touches on so many different issues is affordable childcare. We are running straight into a demographic wall in the whole world, but also in the United States. And we need immigration, and we need people to have families in New York City. I raised 2 kids in New York City. I put them through childcare. It was brutal. It's like a full-time job to figure out childcare for your kids, even when you're in a very privileged position. And 4K, 3K for all, those were great things. Now some of them is being rolled back. But it's also economic development. It's jobs for primarily women of color with low barriers to entry. And they need training and they need better wages. I mean, it's just everything. And it is at neighborhood levels. It supports jobs and housing. So that's what we just need a lot more support for childcare at all levels of income.
Thanks, Celeste. So I've got 3 hands up, front row here, then in the back, and then we'll come to the second row. Thank you.
Hey, my name is Ethan. I'm a recent graduate of Phillips Academy and incoming student at NYU Stern. So I was wondering, a lot of what we talked about today was about like public infrastructure, like better metros, better sidewalks, better more bike lanes, and a connecting dot that I see is money. So the city needs to spend more money on public infrastructures. So I was wondering where the money can come from. Is the city using the money inefficiently? Are there places that we can
yes.
cut back?
Well, that's another panel.
or is there a way that we can New York is known for the private sector, right? People make a lot of money here. Is there a way that we can let that chip in? Or where do you think the majority? So do you think the majority is reducing inefficiencies and?
We should pay for garbage. That could reap a huge amount of benefits. We should pay for garbage. We have in the past, and businesses pay for garbage, and there are many residents we could find ways to have a minimum amount of garbage you don't pay for, and everything above it you pay. Number one, that would reduce garbage. It would pay for composting, which is a huge weight. And all those trucks going to Virginia, other places where we're sending our garbage, how many hundreds of millions of dollars does that cost New York? We'll save a lot of money too. So I think there are some low-hanging fruit. We could charge for parking on streets. We don't do that. So I really feel like there are some hard political realities, but we could do it.
Great, thank you. So we had, yes, in the back and then in the second row. Thank you.
My name's Kazumbe, and I'm an educator, activist in my neighborhood. I live in Bedford-Stuyvesant, Brooklyn. My question is, the city and the state have gotten behind an industry in a big way recently. And when I look around my neighborhood, I see certain types of stores opening. And these are smoke shops. So we're talking about the post-pandemic economy. How could we merge cannabis and these stores that are opening with technology? Get technology inside of these stores and have an overlap. Because the only thing I see opening up in my neighborhood, not just in Bed-Stuy, but across the city, are smoke shops.
I mean, it's outrageous. I think it's embarrassing. It's not like New York is the first state to legalize cannabis. And it was so royally screwed up. I've been very outspoken on this. I find, you can't open a liquor store, you can't get a liquor license to open a restaurant that the community wants, and every time I turn around, there's another smoke shop open. So, they gotta go. That's what I gotta say about that. The illegal ones, the illegal ones.
I'm saying, how can we maximize, because they exist, they're open it, how can we get more technology within those spaces so that we can create more jobs and just deal with the real, what's happening?
I think it's a conversation. I don't know if we have enough time for that, because I think the barrier to entry for those type of businesses are so low, to Jessica's point, that's why you're seeing so many of those businesses there. And I don't think that environment and technology, I mean, we could have a conversation about how technology can make it easier for individuals to get cannabis delivered to their homes, but we're not there yet, right? Or maybe we are, and I just don't know about it. But I think it's a longer conversation. I'd be happy to talk to you after this in terms of like what your ideas are, and then could tell you whether or not it could work.
Thanks, Greg. Okay, so second row here, making sure we see a hand here, and then I see one in the back.
Morning. My name is Michael Matos. I'm the CEO of a personal safety education company called Personal Protective Concepts. My question is basically, I want to address and ask, how can we solve the issue of displacement caused by gentrification? And I'm curious about that. A little personal context about me. I'm from NYC housing, born and raised in Chelsea Projects, went away for the military, came back, and I noticed my community, the people that lived in it, were no longer there. Communities look very different, and the opportunity that those folks hoped to obtain was gone. So I'm curious, how do we solve that, and how do we move forward where when we're building up our economy, we're building up these communities, we're making sure that the original residents, they are receiving the same opportunities to thrive themselves?
Thank you. So solving for displacement, even as we build more of the housing that New York City needs, in 30 seconds or less. Anybody want to take that one?
I don't know. I think your idea about like figuring out ways to have affordable co-ops. I mean, like in Prospect, when I first moved out, this is in the 90s, in Prospect Heights, a co-op was like $120,000. Yeah. And so you had young professionals like myself who grew up in neighborhoods that were able to plant themselves there. Yeah. There's no one now that could afford $1 million to a $2 million home. So again, it goes back to housing and creative ways of building housing for everyone.
Yeah. And rental's not going to solve everything.
Absolutely not.
Appreciate that. Thank you. So where were we? We had a hand right here, and then in the back. Thank you.
Hi, my name's Howard Cure. I work at Evercore Wealth Management. We invest in various bonds of the city and region, and I'm always struck by these type of conversations. A lot of good ideas, a lot of emphasis on housing and transportation. But I was wondering if there shouldn't be more of a regional approach, because I'm listening to this discussion focusing on New York City, but wouldn't it help to improve the transportation or housing issues if you incorporate some of these ideas in Westchester, Long Island, look at the region more, and then go across state lines to New Jersey or Connecticut to think about, well, if you want to help people regionally and supply affordable housing, to improve the transportation system and let more middle-class people thrive, even though it's not within the confines of New York City.
I have a question for you. So a lot of work has been done, including Long Island, Third Track, et cetera, et cetera. There's still not affordable housing being built at the level it should be in Long Island. So the real question is, how do you, maybe even as an investor, influence the people in charge in Westchester, in Long Island, to actually build affordable housing so that there's real use for the transportation that's actually already going there?
My view on something like that is that it's zoning issues, and what kind of leverage would the state have?
Right, but locally they keep the zoning. So the issue is local, because in a lot of ways we've had consent decree, we've had all sorts of trying to pressure the places that we've invested, all of us, invest our tax dollars in transportation that's not being fully utilized.
So I want to grab the question or idea from the back row. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Richard DeSalvo. I'm an economist with the New York City Independent Budget Office. And I really like the comment regarding revenue sources. And there's a lot of discussion of housing here as well. And so what I'm going to say here is not the position of my agency. We don't take official policy positions. But I think there's a fairly strong argument to consider raising the tax rates, the taxes paid by luxury condo developments in the city. I think if you run the analysis that we've done at the agency to meet, there's a loophole in the taxes which permits luxury condos to pay a much lower rate than would be parity with, say, rental units and other residential properties in the city. So raising their tax rates by perhaps 5 to 10 times what they currently are, and this would be a substantial revenue source and certainly a major big idea that could help fund many of the very interesting and effective policies that we've discussed today.
Thank you. So I want to ask, actually, take one moment to turn back to our panelists, not just on that question there, but to ask all of you for one more idea. And I would say in one of three areas, because we've heard about these three ideas over and over today. Affordability, whether that's housing or otherwise. Reimagining our city's business districts, whether that's in the middle of Manhattan or hubs outside of Manhattan. And new ideas for the public realm, which we started to scratch at, but I think there's a lot more there. So I'd love to just take 5 minutes and go back to our amazing panelists and ask all of you one more idea in any of those areas. I'd love to hear from all of you.
So I'm going to follow that thread because there's housing in New York City. They're just vacant. And I think, when you have a global city like New York City where people, international individuals are parking their wealth in our real estate and the apartments are vacant. I think it's a pied-à-terre tax. I might be pronouncing it wrong. But basically, I think Paris has one of those things where if you're not living in the unit, you're paying an enormous amount of taxes on it. We need to do that here in New York City. I don't know what it's going to do with, individuals buying, but it may free up a whole bunch of new apartments for everyday New Yorkers to purchase. So I don't know who's going to be the elected official to actually do that. As you can tell, if I ever ran for office, I probably won't win because my ideas are radical, but literally taxing vacant apartments.
I think, I guess I would just say part of it is there are lots of ideas that are out there. I mean, the New York panel report was 80 pages, however many pages. And so almost like the big idea, lots of people have disqualified themselves for running for office on this panel today. but like is like leadership, is sort of the political will to take a lot of these ideas. There are great big ideas out there on paper and like, but we have to have our elected leaders act on them. I mean, I had an op-ed in Cranes last week about housing, right? And these are not new ideas, but a new version of 421A, speeding up the environmental review process. I mean, raising the FAR cap so we have more flexibility in our buildings. These are big ideas. They might not be new, but Albany isn't acting on them, right? So we need some leadership and we need some action. But, I mean, because we can come up with 105 great ideas this morning, but if nobody's going to act on them, then.
Yeah.
So, again, coming from out of town, I don't know if my ideas are perfect for New York, but here's one. There's a lot of innovation going on in housing, actually building houses more cheaply, building them in factories, putting them together like Legos. If New York City were to pick, I was saying earlier, pick some verticals to focus on in technology, I do believe it helps to build the hardware to help entrepreneurs. Why not pick New York's biggest challenge, housing, and build an innovation hub? Maybe that's what you do in the Brooklyn Army Terminal. Focus on low cost, clean housing. Call companies from around the world that do this. There are companies all over the world that are getting really interesting technologies. Get this guy to invest in them, and promise each company that comes that the city will give it a piece of land to build one of their, newfangled, lower-cost housing solutions as a draw. I think you'd get 100 interesting companies to come to New York to help you solve this problem.
I think it's a really interesting point from Tim's perspective, which I think is a good idea. On one of the topics of like empty retail space, I think some people I think there's a lack of like real kind of innovation of how to think about using retail space. And I think there needs to be just more attention, more entrepreneurship, more focus on trying to take that kind of retail experience and reinventing it. I think what John's done and the Queens Night Market is a great example. Like I think trying to just wedge old ideas into new space in a very different economy with a different competitive set is a failed path. And I think you need more energy, more insights on people that are innovating retail space in a different format, sharing those learnings, building best practices, exchanging great ideas. And I think that could be a big unlock for the city.
Two ideas, one about leadership and the other one about climate. I think we haven't mentioned our climate crisis at all.
Yeah.
It's absolutely critical. And I do think resiliency is really about building resilient communities. I think that drowning is real, and the challenges facing us from flooding are real. I think every public school should offer all of its students and be required to offer its students learning how to swim, and their parents if they don't know how to swim. And that should be a universal program. It will give so many amazing things from New York. I just think it's a huge issue about teaching someone a skill that is free and that they'll have their whole lives. And equally, I think we should change our community who gets to be on community boards rules, and they should reflect the community board. So if from 18 to 100, so the percentage of people living in the community should be reflected on the board. So you have to have
A young person.
your 18 to 28-year-olds. So you cannot have just anyone on the community board. You'll look at your demographics, you'll have slots, and then you can apply, and you have to fill. There needs to be way more intergenerational political movements. And I think really young people care about climate. It's one of the reasons to change the makeup in the community board, because they'll bring those issues up.
Sorry, mine's sort of neither here nor there, I think, but a reaction a little bit to Greg when you were at SBS. So the Queens Night Market is, whatever, one of the stats, I don't like that many stats, but one of the stats I like is that we've launched about 400 new businesses in New York City in the last 9 years. And I'm sort of conflicted about how I feel about entrepreneurship, because the numbers are staggering of entrepreneurs that fail, and I'm not sure how that feeds into the economy. I know we always talk about small businesses being the backbone of New York, but if 75% of them are closing shop all the time, I'm not sure that is a good backbone. But I'm just off the heels. Tomorrow is my last business seminar that we host with SBS. And every year I partner with SBS in this confidential little environment here. It's sort of staggering the sort of how dated the materials are, what it's teaching entrepreneurs. And I cross paths with a lot of your Food Pathways folks. And I think, and I don't know how to get there, but I think SBS is, in terms of its sort of entrepreneurial focus, ends up pushing a lot of people to the three things I see all the time: soap, jewelry, and baked goods, right? Those are very low barriers to entry, which makes sense why they would seek that, but those are probably not changing anyone's lives in any sort of, and I'm not dismissing, weekend income at all, but figuring out a way to restructure the entire focus on entrepreneurship, whether it's pushing them to different industries. I know a lot of workforce training stuff, or also just discouraging it in some cases, right? So one of the things I think about SBS, every time I sit in these seminars, everyone's so rosy, and I am probably the most pessimistic person I know. So I'm always telling people don't start a business. But to the extent, if you graduated through my pessimism, maybe you should start a business. But there's this sort of glorified look at all the great small businesses in New York City, and as much as I love small businesses, I'm just not sure that is the right tact. I'm not an economist. I don't know what the ultimate impact is, but there's something that revamping SBS's entrepreneurial sort of strategy, the materials for sure, and I sort of said, very specifically to the SBS team last week, like you should get a sort of celebrity business owner endorser. Like, you know, these things are so poorly attended sometimes. There's a few smattering of people. Like if you got, just throwing a name out there, like Danny Meyer to sort of be the sort of head of SBS, or like at least the food pathways, right? Like that may generate lots of sort of buzz and get people in the door in ways that are better than, you know, funding a lot of these classes that only have 3 or 4 people. Anyways, that's very specific. And the other one was just thinking parks, sort of live and breathe parks these days. Changing the concession incentive structure is crazy. Like, you know, again, not encouraging anyone to go into the food business, but a food vendor who wants to, you know, set up shop for a day at the park is something like, you know, they have this so-called sliding scale. I've never seen it slide very much, but it's like, you know, $300 or $400 a drop for anyone who sells, and you know that gets pushed on to the consumers. So either the vendor can't afford it, period, or you know they can't afford it and justify it by charging people $20 or whatever they're selling, like French fries or something. So sort of across the board, I think industries and real estate need to figure out a way to either, you know, align incentives so that everyone sort of wins when everyone wins versus, you know, win-lose contractual sort of transactional stuff.
Well, John, I was a little worried about giving you the last word there because you started on quite a pessimistic note, and then you turned it around at the end, I think, with a good forward-looking idea. So I got
John is a future commissioner of SBS.
That's the star power you're talking about. Hey, thank you all so much. Really appreciate everybody's thoughts and time. So it's all the time we have for this amazing first panel. Thank you all for being here. Stay exactly where you are. We're going to move directly into our second panel, and we'll see you in just a minute. Thank you all again.
Nice to meet you.
Yeah, he's really serious about this. Yes.
Flopping all over the place.
We are going to get started.
I don't know if that's on.
Jonathan is very serious about our time. It's not on. Sure. Yeah, how's it going? Good, good.
Okay.
Okay. All right, everyone, we are going to get started. I wish I had a wine glass to clink, but I don't. All right. Well, welcome back from that short break for our second discussion of the day. I'm Margaret Anadu. I am a proud member of the board of directors of CUF, and I chair the board of New York City Economic Development Corp. And to actually earn an income and pay my rent, I am a senior partner at the Vistria Group, where I lead real estate and have been focused on investing in housing for the last 20 years. So excited to be here. And I think everyone knows, today's event is focused on big ideas to move the city forward. And so I'm super excited to have this discussion with Dan Garodnick. It's basically like sitting here with Mr. Yes, who I think, as many of you know, he chairs the City Planning Commission and is leads the Department of City Planning. And I think really exciting for all of us, has really been spearleading the City of Yes, and even beyond that, that's one of, I think, the core initiatives right now, but even beyond that, focused on lots of work in some of our other business districts, from Midtown South to downtown Jamaica Queens, so really just all over the city doing great work. So we'll jump right in. So I think, I'm anxious to talk about City of Yes, but maybe before getting into the details of that, maybe give us a little bit of the context of this moment in New York City, this moment in our economy, why we even need something like City of Yes, why this moment necessitates such a big change in how we think about zoning and all the other adjustments.
Sure. Well, first of all, some of it is plainly obvious to everyone, and some of it is less obvious. The obvious part is we're just coming out of a pandemic. Yep. People have changed the way they are living and working in New York City.
Yep.
There is a new dynamic. There's more entrepreneurship. There's more need for flexibility on home occupations. There's more challenges to our commercial office districts and spaces. That's the obvious part. The less obvious part is that our zoning resolution was written in 1961, and it makes more references to typewriter repair shops than it does to virtual reality. And which is no reference there, just to be clear.
And what about the soap and jewelry businesses that we? Anyway.
So we have some work to do to modernize our zoning resolution, because unfortunately what has happened over time is that in our effort to maintain appropriate separation of uses, we've gotten to a place where the zoning resolution is not working for us, for economic growth, for evolution, for change, particularly in a moment like we are in right now. So those components are the things which animate our need to take action urgently in New York City, and that's what we are trying to do.
Awesome. And give us a little bit of flavor for some of the details, some of the examples of how what you're getting done with City of Yes will make a difference for some of those challenges, like the changing way we're working, some of the issues in our business districts. What does it actually do?
Sure. Well, first, I just want to note that there are people talk about City of Yes, which is a fun and catchy name for something which is a much more technical, dry experience, which is 3 citywide zoning text amendments. So we call it City of Yes because it is an effort for us to connect all 3 of these proposals together, and also they are joined by a principle of trying to get outdated zoning rules out of the way for positive change and growth. 3 proposals. The first was on the environment, which passed the City Council. We're grateful to our partners in the Council for doing that. The second one we're talking about right now, which is for economic opportunity, just passed the City Planning Commission by a vote of 11-1 about a week ago, and now goes off to the City Council. And then the third one is for housing. And I know there's a lot of discussion in the first panel about the connection between housing and the local economy. We have a very big proposal to spur housing growth, a little bit more housing in every neighborhood of New York City, and that is going to be coming later this spring and for a vote in the City Council by the end of the year. But the short answer to your question is, for economic opportunity, we see lots of ways in which zoning is over-prescribing uses in certain buildings. Like, for example, we have use groups in our zoning resolution which tells you exactly what you can do where, and rules which were written in 1961 are plainly not applicable in 2024. So we need to update our use groups. We need to find ways to avoid rules that have continuous vacancy of storefronts as the result. An example, if you are a non-complying commercial business on a storefront in a residential area and you become vacant and you stay vacant for more than 2 years, you can't reoccupy that space as a business. So we have actually prescribed the result there, that you cannot actually reoccupy that business. Similarly, we have a new way we do manufacturing. Manufacturing in 1961, you can think like the way the drafters of the zoning resolution, were conceiving was, cement factory, manufacturing. Today, manufacturing also equals 3D printing. It includes coffee roaster, it includes the jewelry maker, all of which today are categorized in the same way the cement factory would be, but shouldn't be. We need to have more flexibility for those types of businesses that do not have those environmental impacts that we are concerned about, and allow them to be more broadly spread out across the city and commercial districts, both giving them opportunity and also alleviating some of the pressures that we see for real hardcore manufacturing in our manufacturing district. So we've got 18 proposals. I'm not going to bore you with all of them, but those are just a few examples of what we are trying to advance right now in our proposal for economic opportunity.
Maybe to tease out some of the benefits of what it seems like you're driving is more flexibility in use. So hybrid work has obviously created challenges for Midtown, other central business districts, and I think some of what we're seeing in the work we've done at CUF is there's a different balance between kind of the more pure live, pure work neighborhoods, and there are really folks coming to these business districts really more to play, not to work, not to shop, but more about entertainment and those uses. Is there anything in the flexibility in the zoning proposals in City of Yes that really addresses that need to think about entertainment a little bit more differently?
Yes, definitely. And it goes to the point about uses. We are going to enable more flexibility in commercial office spaces to enable different sorts of things, like, when we're thinking about amusements, which is an interesting example. Right now our zoning resolution is very ambiguous as to where you can locate amusements, with the exception of manufacturing districts and Coney Island. And yet, we have a lot of industry out there where, whether it's a mini golf or it's a, virtual reality or an escape room or whatever, where they struggle to find the right zoning mix to be able to locate somewhere. And the end result is either they play it safe and go for the location in the manufacturing district, or they go to Jersey. And nothing against Jersey, but we cannot have that. So the point here is, when our own zoning rules are creating this level of headache for entrepreneurship and business and innovation, we have gotten off the path that we want to be on. And mixed use environments where people live and work in similar physical spaces is not a new concept for New York City. We do it all the time. Just look around us right here. And so we want to play to those strengths. It's good for the local economy. It's good for people to have close access to the things that they need and want on a daily basis. And that's definitely core to this proposal.
Yeah. Jonathan specifically asked me not to get up here and talk all about conversions of office to residential, but it's all I want to talk about. So give us your take. Where are we in? Are we in the 8th inning, the 7th inning, and thinking through it? What zoning is needed, et cetera? What's your take on New York City's real opportunity to think about some of those conversions?
Yeah, I would call us in the I'd call us in the 7th inning stretch on this, because we have a proposal that is going to go live and will be at community boards in the spring, and will be voted on in the city council, that very specifically addresses office to residential conversion. What is it? What's the issue here? Well, obviously we have a roughly 20% vacancy in our commercial office space today, and our zoning rules are much like all the other things that I was describing on office to residential conversion, very strict, very limiting. And, for all intents and purposes, there are exceptions to what I'm about to say, but if your building was not built in Midtown Manhattan before 1961, you're pretty much out of luck if you want to do an office to residential conversion. Exception, Lower Manhattan right here, 1977 is the rule. The geography is a little broader, downtown Brooklyn, Long Island City, but functionally, the meat of the matter is Midtown, 1961 and earlier. So we have proposed to change the date of eligibility by about 30 years to 1990, expand the geography to make it citywide, and to allow for conversion to all different types of housing. And this is a proposal that we are toward the end of our environmental review. We expect to refer it out to community boards this spring and borough presidents, and it will have a vote before the city council by the end of 2024. So maybe that's eighth inning now that I'm thinking about it. Might be the eighth inning, but the short answer is we have a live proposal. We want to see it done, and it is entirely within the power of New York City to do.
Okay, yeah, that was gonna be my follow-up. What do you need from the state, if anything?
Well, the thing that we would like to have from the state, which is important but not necessary in terms of the things that I just described, is a tax abatement that would enable the creation of affordable housing in connection with an office to residential conversion. That is something that's under contemplation right now, and we hope that the state gives us that additional tool because that really is that's the final piece of the puzzle. Everything else I described to you is stuff we can do in our own zoning resolution.
Very exciting. Very exciting. Let's talk a little bit about retail and e-commerce. So I think there was a really nice moment a few months back where the city got to celebrate kind of really getting back to the private employment levels that we had pre-pandemic. In fact, we actually exceeded them, with the exception of the retail sector, where we're still, I think, down about 50,000 jobs from where we were before. And so much is changing. It's sort of the Amazonification of the world, and deliveries and less just shopping in person. How are you thinking about those dynamics? We heard Ben on the earlier panel talk about not feeling like there's enough innovation around retail space. How are you thinking about this challenge in the city and more importantly, opportunities there?
Well, in the context of zoning, where I like to think that we're all powerful at the Department of City Planning. We have some limits to what we can do. When we think about it in the context of zoning, we think, okay, well, let us create the requisite flexibility to enable innovation, right? So we do not want zoning to be the bar to filling that storefront. So that's number one. Number two, we also want to think about the definition of uses and enabling, for example, light manufacturing in commercial spaces is really important here. We will, in that part of the City of Yes for economic opportunity, enable as much space for manufacturing as exists in the island of Manhattan for that purpose. Now, it doesn't mean that's all going to happen, of course, but what we are doing is we are significantly increasing opportunities for certain types of businesses, which then can also locate in a storefront in a commercial area. So that is a big boost, and it's a big way that we can take aim at that very specific problem. We also, in this proposal, are trying to improve our streetscape dynamic to make certain rules that require more activation, animation of streetscapes, so that you don't just see long blank walls of nothingness in areas which otherwise could be more active.
How do you require that? What does that look like?
You define the percentage of a block that has to have openness and accessibility. You limit overall, sizes of space where you have, blank walls. You can define that in zoning. It has been done frequently in special districts in New York City, and we have that as a new citywide rule, which we think will help the experience of all New Yorkers, but also will help the local business environment, because people like to be and they like to shop in places that feel open, more friendly, and you're not encountering just blank walls.
Amazing. So with everything going on with the work you're doing around conversions, City of Yes, animating streetscape, that's a lot. Updating anything from the 60s feels like a tall task, but tell us about what you're doing beyond that. What's your kind of next exciting vision for DCP, especially as it relates to what we care about here at CUF, building a stronger and more equitable New York City?
Well, right as we are doing these three citywide text amendments, we also have 5 neighborhood plans that are already active in various forms. The first, and it's already in formal review, is our plan for the areas around the future Bronx Metro North stations. So there are 4 new Metro North stations coming to the Bronx, and I heard the question earlier about regional connections here. Adding 4 new stops on Metro North to connect the residents of the East Bronx in both directions, New Haven, Manhattan, for job opportunities is a really big deal. And particularly in Morris Park and Parkchester, Van Nest, we see opportunities to make land use changes that we believe are commensurate with the significance of adding new train stations right there in those areas. So Morris Park, by way of example, is 23,000 jobs within a half mile of the station. You've got Montefiore, Jacobi Medical Center, the Hutch Center. You have all sorts of economic activity happening there right now, but the zoning is primarily for manufacturing along the main corridor, and we see this as a real opportunity for us to create more housing, more job opportunities for New Yorkers. We also have plans along Atlantic Avenue in Brooklyn, Long Island City and Jamaica in Queens, and Midtown South Manhattan between 24th and 41st Streets, between 5th and 8th Avenues, where we see a real opportunity, to your point about work and play. Sure. Today it's mostly work. We do see some opportunities for play and live there, and that includes allowing housing in a part of Manhattan which does not. So these are all live proposals. And the last thing that I would mention is our efforts to speed up some of this process. I used to think when I was in the city council that people in the land use process just worried about the political uncertainty. But that was not right. I was wrong about that. It was the political uncertainty and also the uncertainty of time.
Yeah, and the cost.
Exactly, and all of that how that related to one another. So we are trying to speed up our efforts for projects which do not have environmental impacts, which we have studied, the projects that do not cause environmental impacts consistently, regularly, and we are going to move them faster through the system. We call it our green fast track. All electric buildings less than 175 or 250 units, which are out of flood zones and specifically categorized here, that they will move faster through our process and be able to avoid the onerous and expensive environmental review process that frequently is a deterrent for people and also creates additional risk to their housing development, which we do not see a need to do. So that's just a handful. And of course, we got all the rest of the work at the Department of City Planning, which I'm going to spare you right now. But those those are some of the things I'm most excited about.
All right, a busy, busy man. I am now going to open it up to the audience for questions. All right, there we go.
Hi, my name is Clayton Banks, Silicon Harlem. I know you have a lot of different things going on with this planning stuff, but I was curious, do you also include connectivity, internet, when you talk about new buildings, things of that nature? That's really fundamental now, right? So I'm curious what your plan is on that.
Yeah. The short answer is it's not something that we do in zoning, but it is something, as you correctly point out, Mr. Banks, that is very, very important. And it's important for access for all communities of New York City. It's important for us to make sure that that is included as a component part. But to the limitations of the zoning resolution, that is not something we are able to write into the zoning, but it is something that is really important.
Is there anyone else?
Hi there, Mehul Patel, recovering developer. I'm just got a question for.
But now we're about to speed things up.
Yeah,
jump back in the game.
Exactly. I'm actually going to ask a question on behalf of Jessica. I think she's left, unfortunately. Can you do anything to regulate smoke shops? I don't mean the cannabis part. I just mean smoke shops in general, much like we may have done in Times Square and so forth, and saying a citywide limitation on where those can apply and how far they can be from each other.
Great question.
Yeah, I mean, the short answer is yes, there are regulations on smoke shops. The enforcement is the problem, and the city does not yet have the tools that it needs to be able to adequately enforce. And Mayor Adams has been very clear about the need to have those tools and his commitment to shutting down the illegal smoke shops the moment he has those tools. That is a tool that needs to be afforded in New York City by Albany. So you would have been asking the right person, by Jessica. What's that?
What are those tools?
Oh, the tools to, you're asking me a question about nuisance law and how the police can actually enforce against an illegal smoke shop, which I don't know if I'm the right person to answer right now, but it is there's a limitation as to how much the city can actually do, except on they can shut down, I think, temporarily, but they can't do what they need to do to keep them permanently closed. And so, you know, when Jessica's talking about the will up in Albany to get something done, this definitely has to fall into that category of tools the city needs to be able to deal with a serious problem.
Good seeing you, and of course, congratulations. I wanted to find out if you were doing or thinking about the creative economy. You know, we've looked at in Brooklyn, for example, there's a lot of creatives. Space is an issue. There's a unique thing in the city where we have, you know, mixed-use buildings where the second floor is usually vacant because the first floor is commercial. Have you looked at that in terms of creating affordable space for the arts, for artists? Because we know they're the drivers of the economy in certain areas, you know, certainly like Williamsburg, they make an area attractive. And what are we doing on your level that we can continue having a city of creatives?
Well, the first thing we're doing is we're changing the rule in this proposal that the city council will be voting on in the next 2 months to enable the second floor commercial, just like you described. So that's the first thing.
That's exciting.
I don't always have such a good answer to a question, but you teed that up beautifully. Thank you, Greg. No, but that's one, and that's important. I also think that by creating more flexibility of space and opportunity and use, it's much like what we're trying to do on housing, which is, you know, when you lighten the reins and you create opportunity for a little bit more housing everywhere, we believe that will work to the benefit of all New Yorkers. Lower costs of rent, deal with gentrification, displacement pressures, homelessness, the imbalance of power between landlords and tenants. Same thing is true for creative sector workers who need to have space that is affordable to them and opportunities. By allowing more supply of that potential space, we believe that it will result in better opportunities and better options for that sector and other sectors, frankly, too.
And maybe just a quick follow-up there, and any disincentive to the vacancy?
Yeah. Oh, you mean disincentive? Like in zoning? No, we can't create a disincentive to vacancy. We can just define the rules and say what we are comfortable with and what we would like to see. And then it would be different levels of government that could create disincentives, whether they're up in Albany or the city council. By the way, one additional thing that we are doing as it relates to upper floor commercial is an interesting point as it relates to commercial office to residential conversion. Today, you can't do commercial space above residential space in buildings. You just can't. The zoning resolution does not allow it. So we are changing that rule to allow for commercial to live above residential, provided that there are separate entrances, that there are separate elevator banks. And so it would enable a partial conversion of a commercial office building where you have strong commercial tenancy up top, less so down below. You can convert to housing on lower levels, again, provided that you have separate entrances, noise attenuation. We think that that's the sort of flexibility that will also help commercial office buildings to survive. And when commercial office buildings are doing well, of course, that affects the quality of all of our neighborhoods.
Certainly. This gentleman back here.
Sorry, can we pass that down?
As an earlier panelist focused on transportation, the ability to get around the city is so important. So I know neither one of you are MTA, but with congestion pricing coming, I like to think outside the box. I think that the subway and the bus fares should be reduced, and definitely capped. That would allow people with lower incomes to travel more and to move around the city. And the price of the subways and the buses keep going up and up and up, and incomes aren't going up. So that discriminates against lower income people. So what are your thoughts about reducing the cost of getting on the subway or the bus long term?
Yeah, neither of us are MTA, but I do have one thought that just comes from some of the work we did in the transition and certainly some of the things we're thinking about at EDC. One of the issues, and I'll say it relates to both MTA fares but broader, is sometimes when we have programs and discounted fares for low-income New Yorkers, and sometimes even reaching moderate-income New Yorkers that don't, get the uptake that we expect. So even today, for low-income New Yorkers, there is a discounted bus fare, there is a discounted subway fare. But when we've looked at the usage of those programs, it's far beyond the number of folks who are eligible. So we certainly have work to do in, one, making sure that those programs are known and making sure that it is far more efficient to be able to access those programs. But low-income New Yorkers do not need to pay the full bus or subway rates today.
I'm going to end things in just a second, but I did want to ask Dan one question. First of all, Dan, thanks so much for doing this, and I guess I have a political question for you, because I was such a fan. I think all of you know that Dan served in the city council. It did such a great job, and I certainly love the work you did on economic development and heading that committee. But we had this first panel today, and this is a panel on kind of our event today is on big ideas for the economy in New York, and yet, like a lot of the ideas on the first panel, or a lot of the kind of thoughts, were that housing and housing affordability is such the big issue for the economy. Forget how important housing is for homelessness, for solving the migrant crisis that we're seeing, and and for all people to be able to live in this city. But there's been so much kind of political challenges to get any kind of housing built. And so as you talk about the project you're doing with the Metro North stations in the Bronx, or some of the other rezonings that you have going on, obviously the City of S housing plan, are there political thoughts that you have about how to break the logjam around housing, how to, kind of better sell the need for affordable housing development in the city?
Let me start with the proposition that the City Council and the Speaker of the City Council have made it very clear that housing supply and the need for better distribution of housing throughout the city is a top priority for them. They passed a law which has required the city to set targets by neighborhood and to be serious about the problem that we're in. You should know, we, in 2022, 59 community boards in New York City, 59 of them, 9 of them produced as much housing as the other 50 combined. So we have pretty stark imbalances out there. And so, number one, the council recognizes that. Number two, I think that what has happened in the last couple of years, and some real credit to the governor for putting big proposals on the agenda, people see the connection between the lack of housing production and the lack of housing supply and their own lives. 1.41% is the vacancy rate in New York City. 1.41%, which is the lowest that it has been in 60 years. And the result of that, it's not just hypothetical for anybody in this room. It is has a direct bearing on everybody's lives. The price of rent, the pressures in different neighborhoods of gentrification. You try to get a repair. If you're a renter, you try to get a repair. It doesn't matter whether you're a lower lower income renter or even a luxury renter. It doesn't matter. The imbalance of power there between landlords and tenants is stark. It is real, and people are really struggling in this city to find housing that they can afford. And it's a direct feature of 1.41%. And by the way, that's the overall number. When you talk about rents, under $2,400, it's under 1%. So functionally zero. So we are seeing the practical impacts of our own failures over many decades. I think people are seeing that now too. And the third thing that I would say is that we should expect this to be hard. We should expect this to be hard in New York City, because anytime you try to do something significant and bold, and this would be the largest effort for housing supply in New York City's history, it's going to be hard. And there will be organized opposition to this from people who do not want to see any change. And I guess what I would say to anybody in this room is organized opposition needs to be met with organized support. because this thing is not going to pass itself. These things don't pass themselves. They need people who care and understand the importance of this to the city, the consequences of inaction to all New Yorkers to step up and to be heard on the subject. So I do think that we are in a moment right now. Oh, there's one more piece. It's going to be on a clock. It will have a vote. This is not a will it be in the governor's budget proposal or will it be removed at the end of the day? No, we are going to send a serious proposal from Mayor Adams and this administration, the Department of City Planning, to our partners in the City Council, and they will have a chance to evaluate it and vote it up, vote it down, or modify it as they see fit. And we love our partnership with the council. We know this is important to them, and we know it's going to be hard, but it's going to have action this year. So the question will be, what does it look like at the end of the day? So all those factors, to me, say this is the moment we should all be focusing on this. Of course, first focus on our economic opportunity proposal, which also needs to pass the City Council. We'll start there, and we're very hopeful. But then the rest of the year, we're going to be talking about housing. And it's going to be a big and complicated and hard proposal, but one that must get done.
Yeah. Can I add one small comment? And feel free to disagree, but I bet he agrees. I don't feel like sometimes it's well understood, some of the discussions at the New York City Council level and certainly the state legislature, that it is not always a fight between people who think affordable housing is really important and we need to do something and people who don't. I think we also need to acknowledge that a lot of the tension, not all of the tension, but a meaningful part of it is sort of amongst the party, which I'm certainly a card-carrying member of people who think this issue is so important and agreeing on what we think the solutions should be and how far they should go. So I think that is potentially a good thing. I don't think that we are at the place where folks are walking around thinking, oh, this isn't important, we shouldn't do anything. It is like fighting to the death amongst the folks who even think that we need to do something. I feel like sometimes people don't always appreciate that.
And do you have an idea, Margaret? Like, how can we break the logjam? Do you have a thought?
I don't want to sound unambitious, but I do think, 421A is an example. I do think we let sort of our quest for perfection be the absolute enemy of good, right? Like, there's not going to be a proposal of any sort, no matter how much work goes into it and how many discussions we have and how many communities are engaged, that sort of solves this issue for everyone. Because, right to your point, when you have a 1.4% vacancy, there is not sufficient housing up and down the income band. And so unless we're going to get $1 trillion from the federal government, which, spoiler alert, we're not, then there just going to need to be some trade-offs. And so I think it's one of these classic things where everyone needs to be just a little disappointed and not get everything we need and move something forward.
Got it. Well, let's have a great round of applause. I appreciate that. I really do thank you both. Margaret, what a fantastic job facilitating this fireside chat. Dan, you're always incredible, and I really appreciated your answer on the last one. I appreciate the optimism. I hope you're right. And obviously, if everybody can contact their city council member about City of Yes,
get civically engaged.
Obviously we're a supporter of it at the Center for a Urban Future. But thank you all for being here. Thanks to everybody watching online. A big thank you to Fisher Brothers and Winston for supporting this. We at the Center for an Urban Future are about to publish a report in the coming weeks that is all about kind of big ideas for New York City to thrive in the post-pandemic environment. And so expect the first report to have 5 ideas. And so we will send it around to everybody that's here today, and we'd love your feedback. And we're going to be doing more research on ideas that are actionable that we can do to really strengthen our economy. We know we're building from a strong foundation here in New York, but that the world has changed a bit, and that there's more that we can and should do in New York. So anyway, thanks again, and thank you all for being here, and have a great day.